I think the key is that if you like a log house, you obviously want to surround yourself with something that feels natural. And although there's a lot of talk about things like, luxury vinyl plank flooring, which has its place, and I'm not saying that you can't use it. I just feel that if you're into a log house, you're into organic materials. And so you should really use as much organic or natural materials in the build as you can. Sometimes, cost-wise, you can't afford it, and so you have to pick and choose. But I think in prominent places, it's worth the investment and the long-term satisfaction with the house if you go natural, because the man-made stuff is going to look man-made next to a wall that's made out of, nature's materials. So you kind of have to keep that in mind.
Hi, I'm Lynn.
And I'm Lacey.
And I'm Donna.
Welcome to the Acorn Leaf Podcast.
Today, we are going to discuss some of the log home trends. We have Donna Peak with us today. Donna, tell us about yourself. You've been in the industry for a long time, so kind of give us a recap of your history.
I am the editor-in-chief of Log and Timber Home Living, which is a storied, long-time magazine publication that's been in the industry. We're actually getting ready to plan our 43rd year of the magazine. We've been around for 43 years now. Originally, we were just Log Home Living, and we published another magazine called Timber Home Living serendipitously about a month or two before COVID hit. We had made the decision that we were going to combine log and timber together into one overarching publication, mostly because of what was going on in the industry at the time, where there's a lot of contraction, where log home companies are now providing timber frames, and timber frame companies might be dabbling in some log home stuff or some, half-long siding and that sort of thing. But, it was kind of worked out because, COVID happened and everything turned upside down. And it just, was a good decision that we couldn't have foreseen otherwise. So I've been doing this since 2000. So this will be going into my, 26th year of being in the log and timber home industry. And I just absolutely love it. I've been with the magazine twice. I was there from 2000 until about 2010, where I actually went to work for the National Association of Home Builders as the executive director of the Log and Timber Homes Council. Did that for a number of years, missed publishing, and then came back to the magazine, and I've been back since 2015. So it's a wonderful industry full of wonderful people, and I was so happy to sort of have landed here.
Yeah, right, great.
Yeah, I remember when the magazine actually started. I was already in the industry when it started.
Don't tell anyone.
She's seen it all, though. She can say that about pretty much everything. So,
yeah. Well, I mean, Lynn, you were one of the founding members of the Log Homes Council back in the day, if I remember correctly. So, yeah, you've been instrumental to this industry for such a long time.
And it's funny you said that, because the Log Home Council has been such an integral part of the industry. And actually, the gentleman that started the magazine was the executive director of the Log Home Council. Whenever he started this, he stopped doing that. So that's a kind of strange that you actually even went in that direction also. Yeah, it seems to be they're very intertwined.
Yeah.
Well, it's great. It gives you a great opportunity to get to meet a lot of the different companies, though, being in that part of it. You understand the industry a lot better. A lot of people in magazines don't understand the industry they're in, is what I found. And so you guys do a great job of actually learning about the industry.
Thank you. I mean, it's been so vital to me, to not just know the difference between a milled log and a handcrafted log, or a half log, or a king post truss versus whatever. When you're sitting in a room or at a table at a conference with, somebody who does milled, somebody who does handcrafted, somebody who does oak, somebody who does cedar, and you hear them just talking about really what like why they are in that particular part of the industry or why they use that particular building material, depending on maybe what parts of the country that they build in. Maybe there's certain species that sort of lend themselves better to certain areas than others or are more readily available than they might be somewhere else. And you really do start to learn the nuances aren't just necessarily for aesthetic purposes, although a lot of times that is part of it too. But, there's actual constructive and longevity and ease of maintenance and all those kinds of things that go into those choices depending on where you're building. And that's something that being part of the Log Homes Council had really taught me. Like you said, just hearing the conversations going on between other people and the why behind the what, really makes a big difference.
I mean, it's just education, right, for your readers, for because you're going to pass that information along and explain. Because I think it's it's interesting for everybody, and the average person doesn't realize that also. So
it does help us pass along those little things that are missing if you don't really know the industry. You can talk about the industry from a interview level, superficial level, kind of. We were just doing a Q&A with somebody, but it's knowing those little things that are underneath that help you really bring out and really better educate the people who are coming to us for that education. We're not just giving them this high gloss, overview of things. We're able to actually share some of the nitty gritty, as deep as somebody wants to go with that. We have that information in our heads. It's not just, we have to go somewhere else and get it. So that's been super helpful. Of course, 26 years in anything, you better learn something.
You would hope, right?
If you don't, you're doing something wrong, but yeah.
For sure. Yeah. So you said that right before 2020, you decided to merge the two. I guess that was, and you mentioned it was from a company side. They were merging, and log home companies were doing timber frame and vice versa. But I guess from a reader standpoint and from a consumer standpoint, do you also see a lot of those merging?
Yeah. I wish there was a better word for it than hybrid, because hybrid can mean anything from a car to a tomato to whatever. It's just like, I wish there was a better word for it, but hybrid's kind of the one that we've been given to work with, and we can't come up with anything different, I guess, that makes it any more easy to understand. But we're seeing a huge trend toward hybrid construction for a lot of reasons, really. One of the reasons is, cost. There are potentially some cost savings that can be had. There's, ways to, connect log construction with other forms of construction that if you really, really want a log house, but you just can't afford a log house in every area, well, you can maybe get that in the central core where you do all your living with the living, dining, kitchen kind of situation, and you can surround yourselves with the log feeling, but maybe you do your bedroom in a wing and some other form of construction to try to keep, some of those costs at bay. But for me, I think that the biggest reason that we see people gravitating toward hybrid construction is just wanting the diversity that can bring. So you may want a log house, but maybe you don't want it in every room. If you want log walls, maybe you don't really want your bedroom to be log walls, or maybe you are struggling with trying to figure out how to do a second story in a log construction or whatever. And it has a lot to do with personal preference. And just, a lot of times, like when I talk to readers, and I hate to break it down into, boy versus girl, but honestly, a lot of times a guy will want a full log house. Mm-hmm. He wants a trapper cabin. And the woman in the relationship is like, no, I want, some color in my house. I don't want to be looking at, brown wood walls all the time. And so there's, some conflict that comes there because they're each trying to get what they want out of their home, understandably. And so a hybrid home can really bring you that level of compromise and, provide something that, everybody is going to love. I always kind of think of it, I like architecture of all kinds. I've been an architecture junkie since I was a child. I used to save magazines and interior design magazines from as long as I can remember. And, my husband and I went to Charleston, South Carolina, which is one of my favorite cities in the entire country. And there's a house there called the Compromise House. And So the legend goes, although there's some debate as to whether or not the legend is real, but we'll pretend like the legend is real because it's a fun story. So the legend goes is that a husband and wife were building this grand manor in the heart of Charleston, right on East Battery. And he wanted the traditional Italianate, Renaissance revival style. She wanted Victorian. They could not come to terms with each other, and so they decided to split the house in half. And the one house is literally Victorian on one side, Italianate on the other side, all done in white marble. So it looks like one cohesive house, but it is distinctly two different styles when you look at the house. And they call it the compromise house for that reason. And I kind of like to think that, for us, the hybrid construction is sort of that compromise where it gives you the capability to really have that cozy warmth of a full log home, along with, some areas where you can incorporate some color on the wall or wallpaper, which is making a huge comeback in recent years. Everybody wants wallpaper again. So that sort of gives you that level of customization that I think today's buyers are really looking for.
Yep.
I just got all my wallpaper taken down, and now you're telling me it's coming back.
Sorry, Lynn.
It was when I built my home,
Wallpaper's
which we're in right
back.
here. It was wallpaper everywhere.
Yeah.
Wallpaper everywhere.
Yeah, that was the thing. Well, that's it. Yeah, that's what we see a lot also with our customers. I like that phrasing, the compromise. And because you're right, and that's how I've always viewed it as well, as the ability to just have more options, and we've talked about this many times on this podcast, but Lynn is very partial to log homes. I certainly am also. But and it's okay that everybody doesn't necessarily want a log home, right? So we just want to be the place that they can have all those different options as well. So yes,
for us, one of the reasons why we were so specific about log and timber home living is because timber framing is still one of those things that people know it when they see it, but they don't really know what it's called. And they don't really know what to ask for. So we try to show them a lot of the ways that logs and timber framing can, exist side by side. It doesn't have to be one or the other. And, frankly, like we'll see, people get all excited about the timber framing because it does give them the best of both worlds. They get the massive timbers, the heavy timber trusses, all the warmth of the wood, but it's broken up more with some drywall and some other types of wall treatments that you can do than you would have with a full solid log wall. So combining those two things together, I think is really, a great way to make your home still feel cohesive. Maybe it's not so opposite as Victorian and Italianate, like the so distinct, not side by side, but it gives you a way to kind of take that log portion and pull it into another room with the timber framing, but then lightening it up with, some of the color options and stuff that you could get with the timber framing.
Well, I think it also gives people the option to build into some areas that a log home wouldn't naturally fit. Like if they're building more of an urban area, a suburban area, and they're not ready to move out into the country to their forever home, but they want a home that's got natural wood and they can, it'll fit in more than a solid log home typically would.
Yeah, I've seen that where, somebody's building in an area that has an HOA and the HOA is restrictive against log home construction, but not necessarily heavy wood elements. So they can build something that has timber elements on the outside, but they can use an exterior cladding that fits in with the HOA guidelines. But then they can have components that are within the house that are log, even if they do a room that's, I don't want to say paneled, but, covered in half logs. You can get that half log look inside. If your HOA isn't going to let you have a log home on the outside, you can still have that on the inside and comply with, what you need to comply with depending on where you live.
Yeah, we've had those situations that have guided that people in that direction as well. What do you also see in full log construction? Do you see any trends in design or in finishes or materials being used that you've noticed that you see as a trend for the future?
It's kind of building on a trend that has been slowly gaining momentum over a number of years. And as I was, thinking about doing this podcast, I was thinking about some of those things, like what have I really seen? And when I first started in this industry back in the early 2000s, every house was honey gold, and every house was honey gold inside and outside. Every wood was exactly the same wood species, stained in the exact same color, and it was very monochromatic, which was the look for the time. And people, broke that up by adding a lot of, plaid and gingham. Honestly, back in the day, there was a lot of plaid in my world back in the early 2000s. But the thing that I've seen the most recent is just the ability to look at log construction or actually look at logs as a building material and not a style. So, there's a lot more flexibility with the layouts that we've seen. They're not all looking like, your traditional cabin with 2 dormers and a porch on the front. There's a lot more creativity going into the way these homes are designed and executed, so that the logs are an important component, but they are the means to the end. So they're really getting super creative with how they're incorporating them. And they're also playing a lot with log stain colors. We've seen green, we've seen white wash-ish. I won't call it white, but maybe like a gray. I saw a blue one time. It was odd at first, but it was kind of striking when you really looked at it and you didn't think about, oh my goodness, a log home needs to be brown. A log home doesn't need to be brown, depending on your taste. It kind of bleeds into, we've seen a lot of stuff with going into what I guess I could call like global design. It's getting a little bit more creative in looking at Scandinavian style, Germanic style, which seems kind of progressive and modern. But when you look at the fact that these houses were built in Europe 1,000 years before, we ever built them in America, it's really kind of going back to basics and incorporating some of those global influences in more traditional American style construction. Those are emerging. We saw so much of it recently, actually, that we devoted our entire May issue to it. We called it like globe-trotting design. And we had this incredible Scandinavian house. We had this house that was designed, the only way we could explain it was sort of like a Costa Rican tree house. It was actually designed in 3 different parts that was connected by suspension bridges. And it was really cool, so there's so much creativity in log home design now than there was 20 years ago or even 10 years ago. People were going like gangbusters with the creativity.
Yeah, we've seen some logs, some homes that have been stained black, or instead of your trim and your logs being the same color, having staining your logs and then your trim being black. Just kind of switching it up a little bit.
It really makes for a striking place, and the key, I think, is that inside, I don't want anybody to think that they, just because your house is built with a certain kind of wood species, that's the only wood species you can use inside. We're seeing people with, pine logs and, oak flooring or bamboo. Bamboo kind of had its heyday maybe about 15 years ago. It's not quite as popular now as it was then for bamboo flooring and stuff, but we're still seeing some of that. But I think the key is that if you like a log house, you obviously want to surround yourself with something that feels natural. And although there's a lot of talk about things like luxury vinyl plank flooring, which has its place, and I'm not saying that you can't use it. I just feel that if you're into a log house, you're into organic materials. And so you should really use as much organic or natural materials in the build as you can. Sometimes, cost-wise, you can't afford it, and so you have to pick and choose. But I think in prominent places, it's worth the investment and the long-term satisfaction with a house if you go natural, because the man-made stuff is going to look man-made next to a wall that's made out of, nature's materials. So you kind of have to keep that in mind.
And we'll be right back. I know. We get it. You've been sitting there, driving your car. Maybe you're running on a jog on a beautiful morning, listening to this podcast and thinking about building your log home. So we made it easy for you. Start your journey with us here at Gastineau Log Homes. Family owned, women led, and proudly crafting oak log homes since 1977. As the largest oak log home manufacturer in America, we're here to help bring your dream, big or small, to life. You can call our office at 573-896-5122 or swing by the National Model Home Center here in Kingdom City, Missouri, or even visit us online at oakloghome.com to get started, because your dreams never look so good. While you're listening to this podcast, did you find yourself loving or imagining the smell of sawdust or the thrill of closing a deal? Well, good, because we're hiring. From the mill to sales to design to even shipping, there's a place for you at Gastineau Log Homes. You can apply today at oakloghome.com/careers. If you've been enjoying the Acorn and Leaf Podcast, do us a quick favor. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It helps more folks who love log home living find us and join the conversation, which is such an awesome community. And hey, if you love what we do here at Gastineau Log Homes, head over to Google and leave us a review there as well. It means the world to us and keeps the dream growing. Thanks for listening and for being part of the Gastineau family. Back to the show.
Yeah, I see some of the things that I've noticed lately is that we're selling a lot more logs that are not round outside. They're like flat bevel inside and out, as opposed to being round. That's something I've noticed. And we sell a lot of those. And then also we're selling a lot more one-story houses. You know, everything used to be, with a loft or a second story, and we're selling a lot of one-story homes.
That is a big thing that we're seeing too. In fact, the issue that I just sent to the printer about a week ago is on single level living. I mean, that's huge. It used to be that you only thought of a single level home as a long linear ranch. It sort of had this idea in your mind that that's all it could be. And I've seen recently, we've been preaching for a long time. It's like, it doesn't have to be long and lean. There's a lot you can do with single story design, and it's so smart. Even if you're young and you don't think about it at the time, it just makes so much sense. As you get older, you don't necessarily want to deal with stairs, or maybe you don't even have to be young. Say you have an unfortunate accident and all of a sudden you're in this house with all these stairs and you can't really navigate the stairs anymore. We're seeing a lot of people that are just turning to single level homes as their primary option at any age, but definitely as people are building their homes maybe as like a forever home, retirement dwelling, they don't really want to have to deal with the stair situation anymore, and so they're looking not only for single level, but to incorporate other things in the design that can facilitate their ability to stay in that home for as long as they possibly can. And there's so many simple things that you can do, wider doorways, eliminate thresholds between rooms, or even changing flooring material, just having one consistent flooring material throughout the house. And just all these little things that you can do at the onset that are you won't even notice. In fact, it will make your house feel grander. If you have wider doorways, it's going to make your home feel a whole lot grander than if you have these little narrow doorways. And the cost is, there really is no cost when you do it from the beginning. But I was talking to a builder friend of mine about this topic not that long ago. Well, Dan Mitchell. Dan's a builder in Tennessee, and we were discussing, future-proofing your home and that sort of thing. And he brought up something interesting that I hadn't really thought about in terms of retrofitting a house to be more ADA compliant versus just doing it from the beginning. And it was about the doorways. And he said, in a log house, if you have the full log walls and you even have log interior walls and that sort of thing, it can be very difficult to try to go back in and fix that.
Right.
He said, but even if your interior walls are framed and you don't have the logs to deal with, he's like, the problem is that when you go in and you widen those doorways, most often you have electrical wiring that's running very close to that doorway because you have a light switch that you can easily access. So when you're talking about just widening a doorway from 30 inches to 36 inches, for instance, now you're cutting into where that electrical wiring is and where that stud framing is, and is it structural, and all that kind of thing. So that is really expensive and difficult to do after the fact when you could have just literally widened the doorway from the beginning.
Right.
And I said, I hadn't really thought so much about what's in the walls, just, in order to be able to get those extra few inches of access that you might need. And that just made so much sense to me. I'm like, oh, duh, why did I never think about that before?
And I have seen several of our blueprints coming through where people are actually planning for an elevator when it's a 2-story house, and we have a closet. We stack the closet, and if it's like in a basement, you have to have support down on the floor, the footers and that kind of thing for the weight. But we've actually designed elevators into houses for people where they really wanted a 2-story house, but they were concerned about that. And I think that's smart, because I don't think those elevators are nearly as expensive as people typically think they are.
No, they've come down in price a lot over the past couple of years. Residential elevators are definitely something to think about. But like you just said, you have to plan for it. Mm-hmm. So you have to have the support in the basement. You have to have the shaft, or the ability to have a shaft. If you don't want the elevator in the beginning, you can stack the closets and just make the closets the diameter of the elevator. And then you can just go in and retrofit that later. And then that's actually not that difficult, but you have to plan for it in advance. If you didn't, then it's very difficult and very, very costly.
The thing that we usually get into, if it's a 1.5-story house, you end up the elevator's got to be in the center of the house, so the elevator has headroom, unless you've got a dormer right where you have to design it all around it to make sure that you've got enough. We've ran into that issue when designing them for people.
It's definitely an option if you have a plot of land that doesn't really lend itself to a single-story house. Because the other thing about the single-story is you have to think about foundation costs. And, a foundation for a single story 2,000 square foot house is a whole lot bigger than the foundation for a 2,000 square foot 2-story house. So you have a lot of, foundation costs and excavation costs that you wouldn't necessarily have in a multi-story home. But, you also have, offsets with, different types of materials and stuff that you wouldn't necessarily need to finish a single-story home that you would have in a 2-story. So you just kind of have to look at the options. And sometimes your terrain doesn't really lend itself. If you're building on a mountainside, you may need a multi-story home in order to be able to get what you really need.
Right.
Yeah, we've got a hybrid line, barn dominium line, a camper cabin line, pavilion line, all these different things that we are launching right now. So although we've done hybrids for years, but actually having standard plans that are designed to be hybrids and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I understand, there's connectivity issues sometimes between connecting the log house to a different kind of, as far as settlement and, potential movement or whatever, that you have to take all of that into account. That can be kind of challenging. But, if you have a good designer, they know how to do that.
I think that the hardest thing really is people understanding the differences, people trying to explain it to people and presenting. I think that the log home companies, we have there's a lot of potential market out there if we can just get the story across, of that you don't, if you don't really want a log home, that there are other options where you can use real wood. And I'm a huge proponent of using real wood for everything. So I really think there's just a message we need to get out there to people, and I think people will love it. We just have to get the message out.
Well, to that end, we've been doing some what we call special issue publications as long as I can remember, but we have some recently that it's so funny. It's like the two most popular deal with the smaller end of the market and then the extreme higher end of the market. So we've been doing cozy cabins and cottages every year for I think we're on our 8th or 9th year, and it's been incredibly popular. And we do show in cozy cabins and cottages, we show real log houses for sure, but we kind of deviate a little bit and we try to show them exactly what you just said, Lynn. It's like you can incorporate these elements into houses without it having to be necessarily a full log house or even a full timber frame house for that matter. And we try to show them all of the options. I always feel like our job, I get some questions sometimes from some readers, when we show, especially if we show a larger house. And they're like, well, I can never afford that house. I can never build that house. And I said, well, neither could I, but I'm not really here to tell you that you're going to pick this house out of the pages of the magazine and plop it on your land. My job is to show you what's possible. And then your job as the reader or the buyer is to interpret what you like and what's plausible. So whether it's budget or size or property constraints or whatever, I can't speak for absolutely everybody that, reads our magazine. You're all, different economics situations. You have different backgrounds. You have different tastes. You have different parts of the country where you live because, we're international. We're in like Canada, and we even have some subscribers over in Europe. So, I'm trying to speak to as many people as possible. So I feel like, my role in all of this is to just show you what people have accomplished with this amazing form of construction. And then after that, it's up to you to figure out, what do you want to do? And, how do you make it happen for you? So that's why we started last year this magazine we call Artisan Home. And we're getting ready to start working on our sophomore edition here in a couple weeks. And that magazine just was so well received. I mean, I'm not going to lie, like we showed some crazy houses. I mean, just one house was 20,000 square feet and was just like absolutely ridiculous. And you're like, my God, who lives there? Because we don't even know who lives there. They don't want us to know who lives there. But, the point of showing it is just, it was just so exceptional with the way that they incorporated, wood and craftsmanship and all these things into like a very modern take on what I can only really call a log home. It wasn't a full log home, but it was partial. But I mean, just wild what people can come up with. And that's why I always go back to the idea that, logs are a method to build what you want. It doesn't have to pigeonhole you into a style or a design or anything. It's like you can really do whatever you want. And just the beauty of the wood is just what makes it exceptional. It just went from being a big ass house, pardon my language, big ass house. It went from that to being like this exceptionally crafted home that was
piece of art.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. And I think we've been doing this for a really long time. And like you said, we've log homes had a look, right? They just kind of the what you're saying earlier, they had their own look. And, part of what we want the hybrid homes that we're launching to do is to show that you can do a whole lot of different things, still fitting in the log home box, but it doesn't have to look just like the log home that your grandpa may have built, or your grandma may have built. There's so many options that are out there and so many ways that you can do it just a little bit different to make it a bit more modern, to make it a bit more you. And I think, that's the inspiration that you're putting out there is exactly what people need, right? To just see, oh, wait a minute, they did it this way. Well, what if I like it just a little bit different this way, but I really like that. It's different.
People are very literal. They only know what they see, and I guess that's just, human nature. Not everybody can really look at something and then, try to figure out how to interpret that in a new way. So that's why, to me, putting out issues like this Global Inspirations one that we did a month ago, just kind of diving into different realms of construction and then tying it back to natural materials, whatever they may be, even if it's, stone or whatever, because a log house is not 100% log ever. So, it's like, how do you put all of this together and really come up with something new and something fresh? And I think that is kind of key. We're seeing, this is kind of funny, when we do reader survey every 2 years, and actually we're getting ready to launch, actually I think it just launched last week, our new 2025 reader survey where people can go, and it's our print audience, it's our online audience, it's actually out there on social media. Even if you're not part of our audience, you can still take part in the survey if you happen to come across the link to it. But, we want to dive into, like, what is it that you guys really want? What are you, like, what's your situation? What are you looking for? What are your interests? We ask them about their hobbies, because all of these things go into your home. Your home is only, wood and concrete and sticks and stones or whatever until you bring whatever it is that you bring to the table and the warmth of your house. That's all related to what your interests are and, you know, the type of lifestyle that you want to live, whether it's being environmentally conscious, whether it's being self-sustaining with a hobby farm. You know, it's like we've seen all of these things, you know, come through our doors. And so it's just important to bring all of that sort of back into the fold as you're planning your house. But when we do the survey, of course, one of the questions that we want to know is, how old are you? And when we did the survey in 23, we were kind of stunned to find that our audience had skewed younger than it ever had before. Oh, wow. And we had a surprising number of people under the age of 40 that responded to the survey. And we had about 1,500 people that responded to the survey. So we had a pretty good turnout for response. And I mean, it's sort of kind of in everybody's head that a log home is either for a hunter fisherman or somebody who's older. You know, it seems like the baby boomers and the log homes, they kind of go hand in hand. And in the early 2000s, that was true. And we always used to joke that it was the Bonanza crowd, that, you know, the people who had grown up on Bonanza and Little House on the Prairie and all that kind of stuff, that was our target demographic and whatever. Well, guess what? That's happened again, only this time it's Yellowstone.
Yeah.
So now these younger people are watching Yellowstone and kind of getting off on that lifestyle of the cattle ranches. And the log home is very much a character in that series. And so now instead of the Bonanza crowd, it's the Yellowstone crowd. And so we've got this whole new influx of younger people who are interested in this type of house and this type of lifestyle. But they don't want the Bonanza house. They want the modern stuff. So, you know, you've got to sort of find a way to integrate that ranch Yellowstone kind of feeling with the modern conveniences and the smart home technologies and all of the things that, you know, a Gen Y or Gen Zer is looking for in a house to sort of get them to grow up on the idea that, you know, I really want a log house, but I want it to be a smart house, or but I want it to be a tech savvy house. So, but it was fascinating to me that it's like, wow, you know, what goes around comes around.
Right.
Really.
I'm really curious to see what the survey polls show you after this year's.
Can I give you the link? Like, if anybody is listening, they can like go and do the link. They'll be able to find it at loghome.com/reader survey 2025. But yeah, if anybody who's listening, you know, wants to go and take the survey, you don't have to be a magazine reader. You can, you know, we want all opinions. We want to know as broad of a spectrum as we can get as to what people are looking for.
Yep.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Donna, there's kind of two different directions people go. Either they're very tech savvy, or they're people that are looking off grid, which off grid is actually pretty tech savvy too, I guess. But what do you see in people that are designing toward either of those directions for their new home?
What we're seeing is that the average person is only so, how do I say this? They're only willing to adopt so much of the smart home features at this time. Most of it has to do with security, in my opinion. And not even just, you know, security from intruders, but just securing the home. So whether it's a detector that will pick up if you've got a plumbing leak, or, you know, Ring doorbells are pretty much standard now. You know, that used to be a cutting edge thing, and now pretty much everybody's got a Ring or something similar to that where they can video who's coming to their front door. So that's not quite as out there in terms of what people are getting. But, you know, when it comes to like the real smart home features where you're talking about, like, I think I'm going to mess up the brand, but I think it's like Levitron or something. There's like this brand where they can do like your entire house can basically be controlled from an app. We're not seeing that yet. I mean, certainly there are log houses that we know of that have it, but I wouldn't call it a trend. I think that people are a little wary of that stuff breaking. Not that they're afraid of the technology, but they're just not so sure that they want to have to troubleshoot, you know, that kind of level of stuff where your window blinds are automatic depending on what time of day it is, you know. And I mean, they have some really far out there smart home technology that's supposed to make your life easier, but if that stuff breaks, then that certainly doesn't make your life any easier. The biggest thing that we're seeing is a trend toward what I would call like healthy home living, So they're looking to reduce any kind of VOCs, the volatile organic compounds, anything that would create that sort of, toxic level in their house. Air exchange is a big thing. Looking at like ERVs and the ventilators that will, usher out the stale air, bring in the fresh air, all that kind of stuff to just make their actual living conditions as healthy as they possibly can. When it comes to going off grid, that is a mixed bag as well. There are some people who just want the security of knowing that they don't have to think about their utilities and there's another company somewhere that's going to fix the power if the power goes out and all of that. But a lot of times these houses are in locations where it's either cost prohibitive to tie into public utilities or just frankly not possible. So they're, turning to different kinds of off-grid methods, whether, solar power is obviously the most popular one or the most understood one. But the hindrance to solar has been over the years just the fact that honestly it's kind of ugly. You used to have a solar panel in your yard and that was kind of ugly. And then they started putting solar panels on the roofs and that was probably even more ugly, although more convenient because it was on the house. But nobody really wanted a big old ugly solar panel on their beautiful metal roof that they put on their house. And, they just kind of shied away from that kind of thing. Well, now, they're getting so savvy with these things. They make these solar shingles that just integrate into the shingles on your roof and you never even know they're there. So the cost has come down significantly. The aesthetic value has improved significantly. And so I think that we're going to see more and more that these kinds of technologies are going to be more mainstream than they ever were before.
Yeah, I agree. That's kind of what we're seeing as well, I think. And like you said, there's places where people have to go off grid and because of where they're building, there is no electricity available. And we've seen some pretty ingenious setups that our customers have done, and they've been very successful at it.
Especially with our log cabins to go. Like putting in composting toilets and generators and that sort of thing to run them off of. So I mean, the scale can be obviously from bigger homes to your tiny homes too.
Well, thank you, Donna, very much for taking time out of your busy day and sharing with us what you're seeing in the industry. It's always great to hear what's going on in other parts of the country, and you've got a view of the whole country, and like you said, some internationally as well. And we really appreciate you taking out your time out of your busy day to talk to us.
Yeah, I think it's been very interesting. I've learned a few things too, which has been really insightful. And I'm excited for your reader survey again. So tell everybody where they can go to see more of what you guys do.
Again, the reader survey, if you want to participate, is loghome.com/reader survey 2025. If you're just looking for a lot of inspiration and information about log homes, you can go to our loghome.com site. And if you're more interested on the timber side of things, we also have timberhomeliving.com, where all things timber frame are living. So, and if you really are just into cabins and cabins of all kinds, log, timber, stick, whatever, we do have cabinlife.com as well. So that's a little more lifestyle-y, and it's all very much focused on what's going on in the cabin world. But those are our 3 websites that hopefully can inform and inspire your audience.
And if you like to have something in your hand, you can find the magazine on your local bookstore, or you can order a subscription as well.
Yeah, I guess I should have said that, huh? Barnes and Noble, honestly, is probably the easiest brick and mortar place to find us. We're in every Barnes and Noble across the country. We're in select grocery stores if you just want to pick us up. But if you really love log houses, timber frame houses, and everything that goes along with them, the easiest thing to do is subscribe. And there's a subscribe button on both loghome.com and timberhomeliving.com that you can go there, and it's the easiest way to get it right in your mailbox, and you never have to question where you can find it.
I've had people bring in magazines that are 25 years old and bring them in and say, I want my front porch to look just like this one,
That is so funny it is so true. I mean, people that love our magazine keep them forever, forever. I still get questions that, somebody will say, I saw this house in a magazine and I ripped it out and it says it's from 1997 on the bottom. Can you tell me who made the house? I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about.
That is a miracle.